Hi, and welcome to my FlossTube channel. I'm Jane Farish, and I am here because you are here. And I am so glad that we get to spend this time together. Today, I want to start by talking a little bit about the upcoming stitch along that will begin on April 9th. I have to keep stopping and thinking about that because one of my daughter's birthdays is on April 8th, and I keep wanting to say April 8th, but April 9th is the day that we will get started on Jane Hattersley. And this is the stitch along that is being joined by people all over the world. Excuse me. We have people from several foreign countries joining us, and of course all over the states. This is a stitch along that you can get your printed chart from any one of the participating shops, and they are happy to kit it up for you in a wide assortment of different combinations of fabric and floss. The really cool thing about the Jane Hattersley Sampler is that it's 100% cross stitch over 2, which means that you can stitch it on Aidas, on any one of the beautiful even weaves, on any one of the linens, in any kind of account that appeals to you. And in fact, you could even stitch it over 1, which is possible because the original was stitched all over 2, which I'm sure sounds sort of contradictory. But here's the thing. If a sampler is combined over 2 and over 1, then you can't stitch the whole thing over 1. Because if you start stitching the over 2 part over 1, then what do you do when you get to the over 1 part, if that makes any sense? Because remember, the over 1 is half the size of all the over 2. That sounds like a lot of math, but it really isn't. The other cool thing about Jane Hattersley is that it can easily be broken down into manageable parts. You can start with the alphabet and then start playing around with the different motifs. To answer one of those questions that's asked all the time in classes, in Facebook groups, in online discussions, whatever, and that is, where do you start any type of a needlework piece? So I want to talk about that in just a moment. But before I do, so that I don't forget, a couple things I want to tell you. One is that we'll do a Facebook Live on April 9th. In fact, I'm going to do it a couple different times during the day to accommodate different time zones and whatnot. The other thing is that the April 9th date has been a bit of a mystery to me. April 9th, 1832 is the date that's on Jane's sampler, very, very clear. What I don't know is that the date she finished the sampler, or is that her birth date? So I got the help of a researcher at Salem College, and which is here in Winston-Salem, and is the source of the sampler, which I probably should explain in just a moment. But at any rate, what he found out for me is that Jane Hattersley was not ever a student at what became known as Salem Academy and later Salem Academy and College. This is an offshoot of the original Moravian colony of Salem. It was originally a school for girls that lived in the community, and then there were also girls that came from surrounding areas, and actually in some cases quite a distance away considering the times, and would board with local families. Today it is both a day school and a boarding school, and if you know anybody who's in that 9th to 12th grade age range, it really is a wonderful school. But I'm kind of getting off the subject here. So what we do know is that Jane was not a student there, and that most likely the Jane Hattersley Sampler was donated by an alumni at some point in either the academy or college's history. And then 2 summers ago, when they had an auction selling off some of their wonderful antique assets, that's when I was able to buy the original Jane Hattersley Sampler, which made me think that she was either a resident of Salem or a student there. And what was explained to me was that one of the things that made that unlikely was that the college and the academy typically does not sell off assets that are connected that closely with one of their former students, which makes sense to me. So I still don't know anything more about Jane. I've started trying to work through some of the genealogy sites and sources and whatnot to get more information. So we don't know whether or not April 9th is her birthday or whether that's the date at 10 years old that she finished the sampler. So I thought I would share that with you. So where do you start a sampler like Jane? Where do you start any piece of needlework? And that's what I want to address right now, just in general terms, but also specifically to Jane. One of the things that bothers me with the advice that seems to be so freely given in many stitching forums is that everybody says that you have to start in the middle of a sampler, and I keep saying sampler, any type of needlework piece. And I'm here to tell you that just isn't true. So let's break down where that urban myth comes from and what you can do with the information I'm going to share with you. Because what I would like to do is to teach you how to choose any place on any design and start where you want to. The only time I have ever started anywhere near the middle of a design has been in a instructional situation where I was teaching people to cross stitch, and the easiest part to master was somewhere near the middle. For example, those of you who did the Hearts Come Home at Christmas design with me know that I started that in my series of tutorials with the roof section of the design because that was a solid area of stitching and was the easiest place to start. With that design being circular, it made it a little hard because you can't just say, well, start in the upper left-hand corner, because there really isn't one. So that was the reason why in that series of tutorials, I started my own and instructed people to start somewhere near the middle. So with a design like Jane, with this very simple straight line border, what I think I would do would be to start here in the upper left-hand corner or the upper right-hand corner, whichever one makes more sense to you, and then work down from there. When it's a complex sampler border with a lot of color changes and flourishes and whatnot, I generally start in the upper left-hand corner and work 2 or 3 lines all the way across before I turn the corner coming down to make sure that I'm in the right place. I kind of figure that if the letters work out on the first 2 lines, relative to each other, if they line up with each other the way they're supposed to, then they're probably both right. I mean, to make a mistake in each line that would offset each other, that they would accidentally end up in the right place on the far right-hand side, it's pretty unlikely. So I usually stitch the border across, and when I get close to the corner, I've got my other 2 lines done. And when those 3 things have lined up, then I feel safe to turn the corner and start down the other side. So in general, because so much of what I stitch are samplers, yes, I tend to start in the upper left-hand corner and work across and down the sampler as I'm going. One thing I have never done, and many people swear by this approach, and if it works for them, you know, I'm all about people finding their own comfort zone. But one thing I have never done is done the whole border all the way around, praying that it would match when they get together. Because again, it is so easy. If you're 1 stitch off anywhere in that border, the two parts aren't going to meet. So that's why I would rather work across and down, and then I kind of keep those two sides coming down evenly. And as long as they constantly are matching up the way they're supposed to, then I am sure that when I get to the bottom that everything's going to work out. That's my approach. And again, what I want to do is give you the tools to be able to start anywhere on any piece of needlework and then figure out what works best for you. And it's going to be different from project to project. So what is this about starting in the middle of a project? If I want to start, I'll use Jane as an example. Let me get my camera set up here. Okay, I think I'm set up here now. I'm so used to using my this camera as a way of coming in close to things. I kind of had to readjust things so that we were a distance away. Okay, so in the Jane Hattersley chart pack, when you get to page 8, that's, nope, sorry, not page 8, page 7, I think. Yes, page 7 is where you're going to find the center of this design. So you've got your centering arrows here and here. And so as I suspected, the center is very close to where is this part of the stem where the two branches come together. So if you want to start in the center, then that is the stitch that you're going to want to find. And the easy way to do that is to simply fold your fabric in half and then half again. And then where that intersection is the center of your fabric and the center of your chart. So if I were committed to starting in the middle, I would start with the stitch and stitch down and then go on to page. The page that's going to be below that is going to be page, I think, yeah, 10. So after stitching that little bit, then I would come on down and start stitching these flowers and the urn that they're sitting in. So that's if you want to start in the middle. But what do you do if you don't want to start in the middle? If you need to still find the center of your fabric, so you're going to fold it in half once and then fold it in half again. And then where that intersection is, that's the center of your fabric. And you can simply put a pin or something in there so that you know that that is the center. The next thing you need to do is to find out where that upper left-hand corner is relative to the center. So if you want to start up here in the upper left-hand corner, you still need to find that same center point on your chart. That doesn't change. And then you're going to count up to where that upper left-hand corner is. So looking at their page with our stitch count, because we want to start with the corner up here, all we need to do is to take half of these amounts. So across, we have 101, and down, we have 97. Those become our important numbers. So on your fabric, from the intersection that you marked for your center, you will count up 101 stitches and over 97 stitches. And that puts you exactly where you want to start in that upper left-hand corner. Now, if for some reason you want to start with, I don't know, this little bird on the tree, you can do the same thing. You find your center, you count up and over to that point, and that's where you can stitch. So that is true of any chart anywhere. You can start wherever you want to. There is absolutely no reason why you have to start in the middle. And just the thing that I can hear right now, because I see it all the time, is people say, that's how I make sure I don't run out of fabric. Well, I am here to tell you that if your fabric is the wrong size, starting in the middle is not going to save you from running out of fabric. So computing your fabric size is a whole different skill set, and we've talked about that in an earlier episode, and at some point in time I'm going to go back to these episodes and take them apart and make little shorter tutorials so people can find them. So if you have cut your fabric, so you're going to have an extra 2 inches on all sides or an extra 3 inches, whatever amount of fabric you have decided on. If you find your center of your fabric and count up and over to any point on your design where you want to start, you're still going to have an extra 2 inches on all 4 sides, an extra 3 inches on all 4 sides, whatever you have decided and however you have computed your fabric size. So that whole thing about starting in the middle so that you don't run out of fabric is just, I don't know, what's a ladylike word to say. It's just not true. Now, if it is important to you to be in the exact center of your fabric, then yeah, I can see that as a reason. But I want to tell you that, doing it the way I've just talked to you about doing it, you're not going to be more than 1/4 of an inch off. As long as your counting is accurate, you're going to be able to do this. So again, you find the center of your fabric, you find the center of your chart. Wherever you want to start, from the center of your chart, you count up and over, or down and over, whatever direction you need to go into to find that magical spot where you want to start. On your chart, you count to that point, and then on your fabric, you start in the middle and you count over and down or over and up, whatever combination is going to work for you. Check and recheck your counting, and you'll be fine. It's that easy. Although the Jane Hattersley Stitch Along isn't going to start until April 9th, we are in our first installment part of stitching the Roxie sampler. This is not Roxie, this is Roxana Corson, but I want to talk about this one just a little bit because I've gotten some really good questions about Roxana and Roxie. So I wanted to do a little compare and contrast of the two samplers. This one is the reproduction sampler of the roxana Roxana Corson. And as you can tell, it's in very muted golds and greens. What Roxie is what I'm calling a reimagined sampler. If Roxie were a 10-year-old today and she had the colors to choose from that you and I have, would she have picked these muted golds and greens? And my sense of it is that she would not have. So I put my thinking cap on and said, okay, what colors do you think she would have picked? So that's one of the big changes between the original Roxana and Roxie. And I decided to call this one Roxie because, again, in today's day and age, she most likely would have ended up with that nickname. So I'm going to try to point out to you where they're similar and where they're different. So in this particular motif, I kept kind of the checkerboard design, but I did not fill it in the way Roxana did. The shape is the same, but where she used 2 colors, I made it 3. It's kind of hard to tell here, but that is 3 shades of pink. Now, where we have empty, just the tops of the strawberries, they will get filled in subsequent installments. This is a mystery sampler, and so each month I'm revealing a different part of it. So these 3 will get filled in by 3 different strawberries in subsequent installments. And they are replacing these that are just stitched solid. But one of the ideas I kept was how she used different shades of green for the strawberry caps as well as the leaves. So I kept that idea. I kept the 2 shapes of the diamond inner border and changed the color. So the count is exactly the same. And the other change is that this sampler, the proportions are different. I decided early on that I wanted to make it possible for a person to use a standard frame size for Roxie. I know that it's not in everyone's budget to do custom framing, and so whenever possible, I am trying to pick a fabric count that will work out for a standard size frame. And so that's one of the reasons I changed the proportions of Roxie. And one of the other changes is I am introducing other stitches. The original Roxana corset had cross stitch over 1 and over 2, and the satin stitch and the eyelet stitch. I am still using the satin stitch, of course, and will be using the eyelet stitch, but I'm not having any stitching over 1 on the reimagined Roxie. One of the other questions I got is why there's no lowercase z, and that has a very simple answer. It all comes down to math because in refiguring the width of the sampler to fit that standard frame size, and for everything to come out even, for me to figure out the spacing of the large outer border and the math of the satin stitch border and the width of all the letters, try as I might, I could not fit that Z in there. So there will not be a Z in the actual sampler, but of course I will chart it. So those of you who have a Z in your name will have it when it comes time to personalize your sampler. This comment was left by Renee. She said, I'm working on Roxie, sometimes forward and sometimes backwards. And Renee, I want to tell you, we've all been there. So she wanted to know what count and what kind of linen are we stitching on. It seems so loosely woven that I'm having trouble not stretching the whole. My first time stitching on linen, so this is new to me. And then she did let me know that she's loving every stitch, and I am really glad to hear that. So when I packed these kits, I chose a 30 count legacy linen. I like 30 count because at 15 stitches to the inch, I feel like that's an ideal coverage between the stitch count and stitching with 2 strands of floss. I just like that combination. And the color is Victoria Sponge Cake. Now, if you're new to linen and you've only ever stitched on even weave, then I would say that you probably have made the same observation that Renee has. Compared to even weaves, linen is going to seem to be more loosely woven. It still can have the same number of threads per inch, but the threads in, say, Jobelin or Monaco are more closely packed together than the linen's threads used when weaving linen. And that's why it's going to seem looser to you. Now, in terms of her concern about stretching the whole, that comes back to something we've talked about several times, and that is your stitch tension. The thing that I like about the openness of linen is that when you have multiple stitches going into the same hole, you can fit them all in there without stretching the size of the hole. They seem to fit better. But if you do find that the linen threads start looking wobbly, then your tension is probably a little bit too tight. The idea is that you're stitching in such a way that, unless you're doing pulled thread embroidery, whole different topic there. But if you're just doing regular cross stitch, the idea is that you're not disturbing the weave of the linen, that those linen threads are still going to be perfectly straight up and down and sideways. So that's a good thing to kind of look for, is look at the surrounding linen threads, and if they appear to be undisturbed, your tension's probably just fine. Now, there are types of embroidery that we do where we want that openness, and pulled thread embroidery is certainly one of them. For pulled thread, I am looking for a linen that has a lot of openness between those linen threads. And by the way, the other question that I'm getting, it seems like I've gotten several times in the last couple of weeks, is does linen have a right or wrong side? And unless if we're talking about printed linen, or if it's over-dyed in some way so that one side is mottled and the other side is not, that's a whole different can of worms. But if we're talking about regular dyed linen or natural linen, there is no right or wrong side. So that's one thing that you can kind of take a little comfort in. Last week, I began sharing some of my plans for cruising and stitching in the hopes that you'll be able to join me. And so with that in mind, I want to tell you that the registration for the British Isles cruise, which will be the summer of 2022, that registration will open on March 27th. So that's coming up in just a couple of weeks. Now, Vicki Janet from Needlework Press will be sailing with us. She and I will both be teaching classes during our, what we call our sea days, when we don't have ports of call. And when we do have our ports of call, we have excursions planned that are exclusive for our group. And wherever possible, those excursions will focus on something to do with needlework or textiles or whatever. It's not always possible, depending on which cities we're going to. But these excursions are just a whole lot of fun, and because we make them exclusive to the people in our cruise group, it's just another way to get to know the people that you're traveling with. So lots to look forward to. We've got Jane Hattersley coming up on April 9th. We have plans for a cruise that's coming up. And of course, we're just getting started in our first part of Roxie. So it's not too late for you to join us with that one if you are interested. So between now and next week, I hope that you stitch happy and stay safe. I'll see you then.